Today, I'm going through how to oil your piston valved brass instrument. Stay tuned. What's going on, guys? Aaron here, helping musicians get better, faster through performances, educational videos, and product reviews. And again, today I'm talking about how to oil your piston valve brass instrument. And I keep saying piston valve because I mean piston valve. So if you're using a rotary valve instrument, do not use this information. This video is not for you. So if you're playing like a French horn, or you've got a trombone with a trigger, or like an F tuba or a tuba with rotary, stay away from this video. This is all about a piston valve. And if you're confused as to which valve is a piston valve, that's this valve. It's the long ones. It's the ones you typically see on a lot of trumpets, euphoniums, marching band instruments, a lot of tubas. So if your valve looks like this is what we're talking about today. So before we dive into how to physically oil your valve, I want to preface this entire thing. Use only valve oil. I've seen some wild and crazy things of people trying to lubricate their instrument with other things. Use valve oil, piston valve oil specifically. Don't use rotor oil, don't use slide cream, don't use slide grease, don't use vegetable oil, don't use a stick of butter. Use actual rotary valve oil. So I'm going to go over 3 ways you can oil your valves. But first, before we even get into oiling it, let's talk about how to remove the valve from its casing. So most of the time when you go to oil your valves, you're gonna have to take the valve cap off of the instrument. And it's just a normal screw system, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, like we're kind of used to. However, a lot of times I see these freeze up and people get confused as to why. Well, your saliva actually acts as a sealant. So if you're not properly maintaining the instrument and you're not regularly taking that cap off, it's gonna get stuck. So sometimes even if you don't need to take out your valve, maybe just loosen it up a little bit and then tighten it back up just to make sure it's still mobile is a good way to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I would suggest doing that not only with the top, but also the bottom valve cap as well, because we're gonna have to get that off from time to time when we clean our instrument, right? So just making sure that both of them can be removed is gonna save you a lot of struggle down the line. So the first way and the main way that I suggest you oil your valve is actually taking it out of the casing and oiling it that way. Now, valve oil can mess up carpet and clothing, so I highly suggest that you find a spot where you don't mind getting oil on it, like maybe using a sink or a towel you don't like. I like to use, a lot of times I use a bath mat with a spittoon. I actually use a spittoon to catch my spit when I'm practicing in my own home. But finding a safe place to oil your valve where you don't mind getting the oil on anything is highly suggested. So you're gonna take the valve out. You're going to unscrew the valve cap, this thing, and you're going to take the valve out. Now be very careful. I see a lot of students try to use this part to get the valve off. So a lot of times you're just getting the cap off, which this can come off by itself. And sometimes I even see students taking the stem off. Which is just this little thing right here. That's not what you want. This should be what comes out. You unscrew this part and it should come out. So you've unscrewed the valve cap, you're pulling the valve out. Be careful because some brass instruments have a spring underneath the valve. So just be careful because, man, if you lose that spring, it is small, it can roll around, it can get stomped on, it's easy to lose, and then the valve's not gonna come back up when you push it down. So now that the valve's out, what I suggest you do if you have the time or the facilities to do so, like if you're at home, I would actually suggest you rinse the valve off. And by that I mean hold it underwater, let it drain off some of the old gunk, some of the old oil and all that kind of stuff, and then take a paper towel and wipe it off. And if you're in a pinch and you still kind of want to get the old stuff off, just using a paper towel can help as well. Just be careful about using a cloth or anything that could actually get lint or fabric onto the valve, because that could gunk up some things down the line. And cleaning it off isn't exactly necessary. You don't have to do that, but it is kind of nice to just kind of start with a fresh valve when you're putting on a fresh coat of valve oil. So what you'll do is once the valve's actually out, you'll hold it over top of whatever you're fine with dumping, and you're actually gonna go around the entire valve with valve oil, and I do what I call drowning it. I put a lot of valve oil on. and let it drain down. The valve oil should drain all the way down the valve because there's a lot of microscopic nastiness, especially if you didn't rinse it off, that will actually, the valve oil, the extra valve oil will actually pull off. And you want to make sure that you clearly coat the entire valve. So now that you've got a good coat of valve oil on the valve, you're going to put it back in the valve casing. And what I suggest is before you screw the valve cap back on, you actually spin the valve around a little bit just to kind of mush all that valve oil all around. That just ensures that it's not only on the valve itself, but it's also getting into the valve casing because the valve oil does act as a lubricant between the casing and the valve itself. So once that's all good and spread out, you want to place the valve guide into its slot. So you're going to keep on spinning it and lower it down, and at some point it should catch and it shouldn't let you spin it around anymore. You hold it there and then you put the valve cap back on. So once everything is screwed on tight, I would just suggest pushing the valve up and down and making sure everything is working, and then blowing through your lead pipe with the valve pushed down to push any excess valve oil into the slide so you can get it off with your spit catcher or by pulling the slide off. This is a long explanation, but this is, again, my preferred way of oiling your valve, and this shouldn't take you all that long. If you're in a band class, you should be able to do this between when the bell rings and before the band director actually steps on the podium. This should be something that you can get done on a regular basis without taking a heck of a lot of time. Now, the next couple of ways I'm going to mention are not the way I would actually suggest doing it, but they can get the job done. So the second way is actually you're going to unscrew that valve cap and you're going to just pull the valve up. You're not actually going to remove it from the casing altogether, and you're just going to oil around the valve with it inside the casing. And the reason I don't like this one is because it tends to be a little bit more messy. It doesn't go all the way down, and so you don't get that runoff that I was talking about with the other way that can help clean the valve off a little. But it's a really good way if you're a teacher or you're working with young people and you're just afraid of them dropping the piston altogether and causing damage or losing that spring. Or again, if you just need to get this done quickly, this is a good way to go about it. You know, you don't have to remove it, so it's a little bit faster. It's not as thorough, but it still can get the job done. Now, the last way that I will mention, I don't like it at all, but it can be done, it does work. And so if you can't get the valve caps off either above or below, and you need to get your valve oiled in like 20 seconds, I mean, we're talking about NASCAR speed run, then you can actually just flip the instrument over and put valve oil into that little opening at the bottom of the valves. Now make sure that while you're doing it, you're squeezing the valve oil and you're also, you know, just a little bit at a time, and you're also pushing the valve at the same time so it's working the oil up, because otherwise it's just going to settle at the bottom of the valve. And be careful when you flip the instrument back over, because a lot of that extra valve oil is going to want to flush from the bottom of the valve, so it's going to try to get all over your clothing. And it is possible to use too much oil and gunk it up way too much, and it's also possible to not oil enough frequently. That's actually typically the biggest problem, is you don't oil frequently enough. I tend to average to oil my valves about once a week, depending. And also keep in mind that it is a liquid. So if I live in Florida, so this is a big problem here. If it's hot, or if you're putting it in the sun, or if it's in like your trunk, the trunk of your car, that oil is going to dry up and it's going to go away. So you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye out for that too, especially for, you know, those of you who are playing in marching bands. You know, you're constantly in the sun, that thing's going to dry up on a regular basis. And another thing you really want to watch out for is mixing and matching synthetic valve oils with non-synthetic valve oils. So which valve oils are or are not synthetic is kind of, you know, it's a mess, and I'm not going to get into, you know, which is better or what I think. I will say, if you don't know and it doesn't say it on the packaging, just do a quick Google search just to find out which one you're using. So be careful also about the thickness of valve oil. Really thick valve oil tends to last much longer but won't let your valve move quickly, and then vice versa with thinner valve oils. But the biggest thing is just kind of having an idea of if you're using a thick or thin valve oil. And, you know, it sounds like a lot when you're first getting started, but as you get exposed to more valve oils, you start to kind of get a feel of how they are. My biggest suggestion with what valve oil to use is just to find one you like and use it. Stay with that one. Try your best to stay out of situations where you need to borrow somebody else's and mix it with yours. And if you do have to use a different valve oil in a pinch, try your best to be able to clean off the valve so you're starting with a fresh valve before you put on different types of valve oil. Now, this video is not a my favorite valve oils video. If you want to see that video, let me know in the comments down below, but I'm not doing that right now. But I did give a link to some valve oils that I like and that my students have had success with in the description down below. They're good, solid choices if you want to start with those if you're not quite sure where to go to. And also, I do suggest buying in bulk, buying a lot of valve oils, because that stuff just seems to run out exactly when you need it. But that does lead me to my question of the day. What valve oil do you like to use? Do you like to use a really thick valve oil, a thin valve oil, a really cheap valve oil, one that you can buy a lot of, you know, a synthetic, a not? Let me know in the comments down below. But yeah, guys, that's all I've got for you on how to oil your valves. If you like this video, please hit that like button. If you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button. I do new videos like this just about every single week. So if you want to get notified of when I upload these videos, go ahead and subscribe and hit the notifications to get these videos directly to you. As always, I'm Aaron Campbell, reminding you to be happy, but never satisfied. I'll see you next time.